all beings always be free from pain and its causes. These are in all the Buddhist traditions, actually, Indian and Tibetan traditions. These are reminders to ourselves to develop love and compassion. May everyone have happiness. May everyone be free of suffering. And that kind of huge intention, which is at the very heart of Buddhist traditions, really all great traditions, that kind of huge intention is itself a liberation from most of the kinds of thoughts that plague us, if you think about it. What gets our mind going? We all have that experience, that chatter in the mind that is agitating. And if you're sensitive to your body, as we do the practice that we're starting at 11, sometimes you get a sense when, maybe you're calm and you're watching your breath, and then you're not either calm or watching your breath. And if you look very closely, actually there's been research done on this, that what happens just before you are neither calm nor watching your breath is a little fleck of tension somewhere in your body, often in the chest, a little bit of tension. So it's not relaxing. So the kinds of thoughts that tend to plague us can, you look into your experience and see if you feel this is true, has to do a lot with, we don't usually think in terms of love and hate in our ordinary ramblings that go through our minds, but most of it has to do with what we like and what we don't like, who and what we like and don't like and want and don't want. And we ourselves don't want suffering. And we don't want people around who cause us any kind of pain either. And we do want people around who we feel support us and love us and whom we just naturally love. Now, how much of our reflective moments, not mindful moments, but just, spinning moments, are about, okay, how can I avoid so-and-so one way or another? How can I spend more time with these other people? Maybe very positive, my family. I'm not saying that's not a good thing to want to spend time with your family, but the level of agitation that goes into liking and disliking is considerable. No? We don't want it to rain, for example. Little things. We don't like the way the food is cooked. The soup wasn't so good in this restaurant. The soup that my friend made me wasn't as good as... Liking and disliking is a very constant thread through our somewhat agitated ramblings through the day. And we just think that that's the way life is. That's what happens. Your mind goes da-da-da-da-da-da, like, don't like, hope, fear. It's another way of dividing it. Hope and fear. Afraid it's going to rain. Really happy to see the sunshine. So in this way, I think it's very profound to consider that developing what are called the four boundless states, the four measurables, this is what we are singing, love, compassion, joy, and equanimity, is actually a way to open up. I wish everybody to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So that means I can let go of judging who deserves it and who doesn't. That takes quite a toll on one's reflective counter. Who should have happiness and who shouldn't. Never mind, everybody. Who should be free of suffering and who shouldn't? That's a big one. There are really harmful people out there, and ordinary mind thinks, well, we don't care. They should suffer. But that grips us into a sequencing of reflections that's agitating. It doesn't support our being present to the depth of grace and wonder that is within us, which is another big teaching from the Buddhist traditions. And it's not the one we're highlighting today, but we come back on it again and again, and it is relevant. the kinds of agitation that comes from wanting and not wanting, hoping and fearing, is not just not so pleasant in and of itself, but also it actually obstructs us from something already available in principle to us that's quite wonderful, quite amazing. And sometimes we touch into that when we do a little practice. And even if it's only a tiny taste, it's so exquisite that we keep coming back and back and back. So that's a frame for what we're talking about today. And then there comes the actual art of how do you let go of all of these thoughts? How do we relax our agitated or conceptual apparatus that seems always to be in gear? And this is also a subject of the Buddhist sutras, and this is the one that I think Harvey wants to bring to your attention today. That's what I think.
So there is a discourse, it's called the Relaxation of Thoughts. In Pali, it's Vitakka Santana Sutta, and it's available online for free by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, translated. We wouldn't necessarily encourage every approach to the relaxation of thoughts that are described in this particular discourse, but there's one that, and I'm only going to read one line. As a practitioner is attending to the relaxation of thoughts, with regard to those thoughts, they become abandoned and subside. And with their abandoning, the mind becomes steadied, becomes settled, becomes unified, and it becomes concentrated. So that's just a very pithy statement about relaxation of thoughts. One of the things that I think we're all aware of when we are lost in thought is the way we are completely absorbed in the thought process. And the critical step that we're actually cultivating when we're doing the practice that we do later in the morning is just a little bit of a separation from being completely united with our thoughts. And so what is united with our thoughts? It's, I think, most people, I don't think I'm unique this way, but let's say there's something wrong with your program on your computer and you're calling the service people online, and first you're getting somebody who maybe you can't understand that well, and then second, you've got this project you need to finish, and then third, you're trying to explain it and they're not exactly understanding it, and you go into a certain kind of state. And I mean, this was happening with me yesterday. It was just a very, very simple thing. But for one thing, it's like, I'm not going to budge until this particular problem is solved. And two, my life depends on this problem being solved. And three, the fact that you don't understand me means you are, and all the curses start coming in terms of the moral inventory that I'm about to sort of impute to you. But most of all, we are like thoroughly merged with the emotion, the threat, the feeling of survival, and the tension. And there are a lot of words now in the psychology world that talk about this kind of immersion in our reaction patterns. We've got centered in it, we've got identified with it, we've got automatization, which is a bit of a mouthful, and then a new one that I've just found out about recently, which is out of what's called the acceptance and commitment therapy model, they use the word fusing and defusing. And so, when we're on the phone with the computer people, we usually get, at some point, we might start off calm and relaxed. But, when they say, oh, by the way, your email is no longer owned by you, somebody else owns it, and, you have no access to your email, we get fused. We get fused with our reaction pattern. And it's like, no, I know I own my email. No, I'm sorry. Somebody else has prior take on the email. That's me. I'm sorry. It's a fusion experience. And I guess, we've all had some version of that, whether it's to return a product or get something repaired. So what we're doing when we're cultivating attention in the way that we're doing it is we're settling, focusing on the breath and resting in the breath. Thoughts are coming and going. We're just letting them come and go. And that in itself is a huge step in our spiritual development. A lot of us hate ourselves. It's kind of what I call the common cold of mental health. And traditional teachers don't exactly get that. And I think it has to do with maybe the way people were raised traditionally versus the way most of us have either been brought up or the way we raise our children. We all kind of have this substratum of not liking ourselves. And when it comes to these thoughts that Anne was talking about, especially if we happen to find ourselves attracted to spirituality, usually we hate some aspect of our experience. We really want to reject our evil thoughts or our sensual thoughts or our hateful thoughts or I think the most politically incorrect thoughts are envious thoughts. You just bought a beautiful, red, shiny sports Lexus that we saw on the TV the other day. Beautiful car. You bought it. And you have that thought, hope it crashes. This is envy at its purest. Now, most of us, if we're honest, know that in some settings or in some circumstances we have envious thoughts. But almost nobody wants to talk about that. I mean, people would much rather talk about, I want to have sex with 1 million people, or I want to even kill 1 million people. That's okay. But you got a shiny new red car and I want to scratch it? Nobody wants to admit to that particular form of thought. So we start hating our thoughts. We hate our own reaction patterns. And I think most of you are familiar with the kind of the metaphor of the tar baby, that, you got a pole that's full of tar and you put your hand on it and you're sort of stuck, and then you want to get free of it, so then you put another hand on to push yourself away, and then you start using your feet, and before you know it, every part of you is stuck on this pole of tar. And that's pretty much the way we are with our naive attitude towards our troubling thought processes. I'm hating this service representative, and I'm hating that I hate this service representative, and before I hate that, and then usually people just have to take a drink or something, or a tranquilizer. Or whatever people's favorite form of distraction is, because they don't know what to do with themselves. They're so upset. So the skill that we're cultivating when we're cultivating the meditative practice is to defuse. But part of defusing includes, as Anne sort of said, it's kind of implicit in the in the tradition, it's not necessarily talked about that much, but you've got to be able to give these thoughts a certain kind of respectful, tender, loving space. Yeah, I've got this envious thought of mine. Okay, it might be interesting to contemplate where that comes from or what it's about today. Or, I've really got to get one of those red cars, and I'm not going to rest until I get one. So I've got this amazing desire. And, you could get into war with that, but perhaps a more sensible approach is to be able to see what the desire is, recognize that it's a sort of an emotion and a thought. I want this red car. I've got some feelings in my body associated with it, and they all arise and cease. And there's a bit of a loving, tender observer that we're cultivating. And so even beginning this summer teaching on Tuesdays, we're going to be talking about loving attention. Because really we don't, in a way, emphasize enough that we need to be kind to ourselves. We need to have a kind of spacious, kind, tenderness to all this stuff that's plaguing us. Interestingly, you get into the more profound teachings, and there are ways of realization where all this stuff is just sort of seen as play, or even sometimes they use these beautiful words, ornaments, or dynamic display. So there's not that much of a war with it. And it's important for us, I think, both psychologically and spiritually, to appreciate that we might get troubled by the way we get identified and fused and reactive. We're all human. We know what that's like. We all have our sort of things. Some people it's cars on the highway, some people it's the service reps on the phone, and some people it may be the table's not set right, whatever, people coming late or people coming early. We've all got our stuff. Or if you're stuff free, it might be, nothing excites me. Well, that's your thing. I got no juice for anything. Well, that's also an issue. I'm not engaged in anything. I'm completely indifferent. What a horrible fate that would be. So whatever it is, though, we may start off with a kind of self-despising or a self-loathing, and it may be a necessary place where any kind of spiritual path begins. Certainly if we look at the classic story of the Buddha, his story began with a kind of revulsion at the sight of old age, sickness, and death, and an attraction to the calmness of seeing some renunciate. But as we get deeper into our practice, we realize that if we're hating ourselves or despising our reaction patterns, that's just another kind of place to trip, and it's another tripwire. And that certainly it's not going to be possible to love and compassionate other people if we don't love and compassionate ourselves. And again, in the West, we need a certain kind of attention to this because we're actually quite not loving and compassionate to ourselves. We're great at doing, we're great at accomplishing, we're great at twisting ourselves up into knots and getting stuff done. And so even when we get to the practice of meditation, we bring that kind of engineering mentality of I'm going to engineer myself. And I would say, guilty as charged myself, that, okay, I'm going to get my cushion down there, and I've got my little altar, and I've got my bowls, and I've got my incense, and I've got my timer, and I've got my gong, and now I'm going to sit by God, and I'm going to calm my mind down. And there's a phrase in Pali, it's like samyak. Samyak means correct. Correct, like mindfulness, samyak sati. And there's a reason that they use that word. And we really need to pay a lot of attention to the whole atmosphere with which we bring to our practice. In computers, when I was taking my first computer course in graduate school for social work, and this is known, I'm thinking for everybody, garbage in, garbage out. You put crappy data in, you're going to get crappy data out. If you sit down with an engineering attitude, you're going to have an engineering meditation. Now, sometimes, due to the grace of the blessings of the practice, something else actually will sort of chime in. And so if that's the only thing you can do, fine. There can be blessings. But give some thought to that in every moment of our lives, and especially in the moments of practice, we want to have a kind of gentility and a kind of tenderness and a kind of love and a kind of compassion for even the worst aspects of ourselves. Worst in the sense of you might not necessarily want to air them in public. And so we'll leave you with that thought. We'll take a couple of minute break before we start our Sunday sitting.